So, this is a response to I guess, disagreement between Bob the World Builder and Dungeon Discourse. And I don't know whether Dungeon Craft has spoken about this or anyone else with Dungeon in their name or Building in their name or any of the other Dungeons and Dragons people, or maybe this is just confined to these two YouTubers, and maybe they've either directly or indirectly, I guess, contradicted each other or disagreed with each other. And I'm just basing this off of last week when I saw a video by Dungeon Discourse, who was always something, finding a controversy somewhere, whether it's in miniature games or whether it's in role playing games. There's always some controversy every single day somehow. I don't know. I miss most of those. In fact, I miss most of the daily crises that happen in the real world too. So I'm not that clued in, but I happen to disagree with both of them on this matter. The main point that I disagree with Bob the World Builder is easier to get across is that the OGL, the open game license that Darrington Press that makes Daggerheart has put forth is restrictive, and those restrictions are a little egregious. But the part that I disagree with them on is that they probably won't sue. I'm like, there's no way of knowing that. And in fact, if you're wondering about companies suing to protect their IP, you should err on the side of, yeah, they'll probably do that. So that's what I would guess if someone was to say, are they going to sue if someone does this, or are they going to sue if someone does that? I'm like, if they think they can sue, they'll sue. That's how I guess. I'm not saying that it's a guarantee or that it's going to happen. But then I disagree even more strongliness of against Dungeon Discourse with their take on how the OGL, this is like a new OGL crisis, but it's not really. So to go back, you have the Dungeons and Dragons OGL, the 5th edition OGL that was then attempted to be updated by Wizards of the Coast, which they, at that point, had every right to update it. But it would have created new restrictions and onerous environment in which people may not want to use the OGL. And this caused a backlash. But the main reason that this caused a backlash is because it seemed to be breaking a promise. And it could easily be argued that they were breaking a promise and that they were going back on something that they had done. Now, this isn't to say that they're required to have an OGL if they made a 6th edition or an OGL on 4th edition or whatever, but they had one on 5th edition, and it was pretty fair, not nearly as open as it could be, but when they tried to make it more restrictive and more difficult for a third party to want to create things, there was an understandable backlash against it because they were trying to walk back a promise. But this isn't the case with the OGL that Darrington Press is putting out, because as far as I know, there was no promise for Daggerheart to have an OGL. And I guess I don't know whether people either forget things, never research things, or willfully forget things, as in they willfully decide they're not going to talk about this thing because it undermines whatever story they're trying to present. But up until about, I don't know, 99, 2000, whenever 3rd edition came out, there was no such thing as an OGL. And the norm, and even the norm today, is for there not to be OGLs, meaning that the way of doing things when you are using someone else's IP is to ask their permission and invariably pay them money for a license. An OGL makes it easier so that you don't have to ask permission, you just have to comply with the OGL that they've put out, and therefore you can then make third-party materials that interface with their game, right? And you can use certain proprietary copyrights, but not all the copyrights in 5th edition. Whereas now, because of what happened with the Dungeons and Dragons OGL crisis, they had to really walk back what they did and then As a show of good faith, they put it into the Creative Commons, most of the SRD, which is most of the basics of 5th edition. And they were hoping that this would quell the controversy, which to some degree it did, but also there's still a loss of trust. In any case, a company doesn't have to have an OGL, doesn't have to put stuff in the Creative Commons. They can just sit on their IP. They don't even have to give permission when someone asks for permission or wants to pay for a license. They don't have to let them pay for a license. They can sit on the IP and do whatever they want with it. They don't even have to put up materials themselves. It's their property. I don't understand why anyone thinks that someone has an obligation for their property to do something in a certain way because you think that's the way it should be. Now, I happen to agree that an OGL or even Creative Commons stuff is actually better for a company and will result in more sales, more profit, more revenue, more money, right? But that company may not agree. And the point is, most companies do not agree. We're still under the model of ask for permission, pay for permission, that kind of thing. No such thing as an open license that tells you what you can do and what you can't do. Now, I understand that a lot of people on the internet are very into the fan groups, fan art, and fan films, and, third-party materials for games. And they somewhat equate the third-party materials for games and fandom, right? Fandom is a thing where you create something because you really like something, and you create some form of art, some form of writing, and it's not meant for you to profit off of. And profit doesn't just mean money; it means getting online attention through social media, and your social media networks benefiting. You end up with more followers, and therefore you could sell more products that aren't necessarily using an IP in the future. So you are benefiting from it. So it's not just about making things free. It's about how someone can benefit from something. So in this day and age, a lot of companies have sort of walked back how litigious they are in protecting their IP. Depending on the company, some are still very litigious and some are not. They recognize that having fan films, fan art, and materials that people make as a byproduct of their product increases their product sales and increases the enjoyment people get and the exuberance for it and increase sales. So I agree that an OGL is really good, but I can't prove that an OGL is really good. I don't think anyone really can. It's possible there's an analyst somewhere that has written a paper on this, but I don't think so. I just, in my gut, I know that it's good. And having a restrictive OGL is less good, and not having an OGL and just using the old model is less good. So that's where I'm at with that. I'm not at they have to have it and that they're a bad company because they don't have it. I'm just in the camp that if they have it, they've made a smart choice, I think. And this idea that Darrington Press, Critical Role, Daggerheart has to have an OGL and it has to be less restrictive is a ridiculous statement. They don't have to do anything. Now, they may now result in even less sales because people are upset about this and people are making videos about being upset with this. So, like, let's say if their sales would have been 100% with a great unrestricted OGL, and then without that, it's down to 80%. And then because of this being a controversy, it's down to 70%. Sure, maybe. But it just kind of annoying to me sometimes when people complain about things that there's not much really to complain about unless you have this idea that no one should have any ownership over their IP. And the reason I find that ridiculous is because there's nobody watching this, and by nobody I mean it's less than 1% of people would be okay with something that they created and someone else being able to do whatever they wanted with that creation. Most people want to protect their own creative output. And most people don't even want to give other people permission to use their creative output and change and make it different because the person has a different perspective, and alter the message or the themes or the whatever, because that invariably happens when more than one person works on a product. And so you will find many artists, for some reason, they're the type of people that would complain about the OGL thing, but the minute any of their art is used by somebody else or AI, well, that's terrible. And AI is just training itself to draw better art. It's not even using necessarily their thing. It's using a collection of millions of creative outputs, and you can't even identify the exact thing. But the minute that their stuff is used by either human or AI or whatever, they would cry bloody murder. It's their thing. They own it. And if they could, they would sue. But when a large company does it, it's evil, or it's bad, or it's just, we need to get out the pitchforks and get them to stop. But it's just so weird because the OGL is a byproduct of something that happened with third edition and this connection with freeware. In the 90s, there were a lot of people that had this economic model of giving out software for free, and then people would send in donations if this software was of value to them, and they felt that they could make more revenue doing it that way than if they charged however many dollars for it, because they would get less people using their software who would pay money, but they would get an order of magnitude more people using their software, most of whom wouldn't pay money, but a lot would, and they would pay more in total than if they had charged in the first place. So this idea kind of made its way into Dungeons and Dragons 3rd edition, and they had an OGL. And I don't know if they had an OGL for 4th edition. I don't think they did. Then when 5th edition came around, they did an OGL again, and this contributed to the boom in 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons and the exciting exuberance from 2016 to halfway through the pandemic, when everyone was talking about D&D and D&D was great. And then, unfortunately, they walked back their OGL and it tarnished their reputation, and they made some mistakes with D&D 1 and their tabletop simulator and D&D Beyond, and then they also made some Magic the Gathering poor decisions, and it turned people against Wizards of the Coast, which I don't necessarily disagree with, but this idea that everyone has to have an OGL now just because D&D did it and it worked out well. So, like I said earlier, I think it's a good idea. It's a better idea than not having it. But there are people that think they have to have an OGL and it has to be unrestrictive, and every company has to do this. And it's just not the case. And it's a silly argument as far as I can see, and I don't think anyone's really going to come up with a good argument as to why any company needs to do this, as in they have to do this, as in they're terrible if they don't do it and we should fight to do it. I guess because a lot of people want to use Dungeons and Dragons, but again, if someone used your creative thing, the thing that you own, you wouldn't like that unless they paid you or they asked you permission, or you had some form of open license to that thing, right? So it applies also to Wizard of the Coast, the big old evil corporation, out in Seattle, in the Ivory Tower. It applies to them as much as it applies to an individual. And the argument that, laws are different for corporations than they are for people, not really. It's the same thing. It's just that one thing happens to be larger than the other and have access to more resources and therefore more lawyers. And so it turns out that they have, I guess, better access to the law than an individual, and that it's difficult for an individual to protect their own copyrights, but not completely difficult and not impossible, and a lot of individuals do protect their copyrights. And you will find a lot of people that you watch online. There's YouTubers who do not want anyone to be reacting to their YouTube videos because they're so protective of their creative output. A YouTube video, I know, but it happens. And there's some YouTubers that I really like, and they make really great stuff, and they will not let people who do React content react to it because people see React content as slop, and they also seem to think that it harms them in some way, which I don't necessarily agree with. So that's just what they want to do with their creative output, and you can't do anything about it. So I feel that way about Darrington Press and Daggerheart because they never even promised an OGL, and they never built up these years of having this unrestricted OGL. So there should be no expectation for such a thing. Now, you could ask and let your views be known that it would be a good idea for them to do it, but if they don't want to, they don't have to. No one should complain. Wizards of the Coast, a little bit different. They were kind of in the middle of a promise. They were doing things that led to people to believe that they were promised certain things. And when Wizards of the Coast tried to walk it back, they were walking back a promise. And they were making it difficult for people who had already made business decisions based on that promise, right? So it's different. And I don't know why people are treating it as the same, or that people are freaking out about Daggerheart and their OGL in almost the same way that they're freaking out to Wizards of the Coast and their OGL when they're not the same situation. So I've gone on quite long enough about that, and I don't know if any minds will be changed. People will probably still act the same way, but let me know what you think about Daggerheart's OGL in the comments below. Thanks a lot.